Welcome to the debate. Imagine a nearshore development team, right? The code is virtually flawless, the AI tools are like state-of-the-art,
Mm-hmm.
and the team is working around the clock with absolute dedication, but yet the enterprise SaaS project still completely fails within the first 60 days.
Right. It happens like every single day.
Exactly. And why? Well, because during a critical kickoff call, someone was simply, too culturally polite to admit they didn't understand what a US-based client meant by the word quick.
Yeah, you step into the world of nearshore software delivery and cross-cultural client integration, and suddenly you realize that all the technical brilliance in the world is just held hostage by human interpretation.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of operational muddy waters.
Which brings us to the core tension we're exploring today. When assessing the strategic value of nearshore software firms and Latin American delivery teams, what is the ultimate driver of client trust and margin protection?
Right. Is it the implementation of rigorous AI leadership and, structural enterprise-wide governance?
Or is it the mastery of human-to-human bilingual communication during those critical early days of a client relationship?
So to explore this, we're looking at the executive portfolio, the strategic models, and the published intellectual capital of Phillip Corey Roark.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, we are diving into his advisory positioning for Medellín and broader Latin American business audiences, the entrepreneurs, the nearshore firms, and the SaaS implementation companies trying to scale.
And I'll be taking the position that structural AI transformation, executive governance, and long-term operating discipline are the primary engines of value. I mean, if you look at Roark's career, the blueprint is right there.
Okay, how so?
Well, he began as a U.S. Navy cryptologist, which is fundamentally about building and operating secure, mission-critical systems, right? He then spent more than 25 years leading global enterprise SaaS rollouts at Insala.
Right, for corporate giants like Deloitte and Coca-Cola.
Exactly. And for the last 5+ years, he's been deeply embedded in active AI transformation work. To me, that entire arc points to systems and structure.
Well, and I will be representing the perspective that bilingual client integration, decoding client intent, and mastering the English-speaking operating environment are the absolute foundational prerequisites for any technical success.
Okay.
I look at that exact same Navy cryptologist background and see something entirely different. Tactical cryptology isn't just about the machines. It is about decoding critical human intent under immense pressure.
Interesting.
Yeah. That is why Roark's current positioning in Medellín as a fractional client integration lead is so potent. You have to secure the human bridge first.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how these projects actually fail. Because I believe the root cause is structural, not just conversational.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, you're framing this as a communication breakdown at the human level. But in his book, Harnessing the Power of AI, a roadmap for successful leadership featuring Dr. Grant AI, Roark introduces this really vital concept of acceleration debt.
Oh, yeah. Acceleration debt is terrifying when you see it in practice.
Exactly. If you are a founder listening to this, you've probably felt it. When organizations deploy AI coding assistants or automated testing to speed up their output, but they do it without explicit data boundaries, without manager calibration and clear escalation triggers in place, they don't just make small localized errors, they multiply inconsistencies at an enterprise scale.
Right, it compounds.
Right. Let's make this concrete. If a junior developer uses an AI tool to write 1,000 lines of code overnight, and there's no structural governance to check how that code handles client data privacy, well, that speed is actually a massive liability.
Right, the AI helps you drive off the cliff at 90 miles an hour instead of 30.
Precisely. Which is why I argue that AI governance is not like a manager standing over your shoulder with a clipboard. Think of AI governance like the rumble strips on a highway.
Okay.
It doesn't drive the car, but the second a developer or a team starts drifting out of scope or violating a data threshold, the system creates immediate structural friction, so they can't accidentally veer off the cliff.
I see.
Yeah. If you don't have that decision architecture in place, if you don't have a system defining who owns the final release, then speaking perfect English to the client just means you are efficiently and politely communicating your own structural failure.
I come at it from a different way. You are looking at the enterprise scale, like at the macro architecture. But the actual root of failure, the moment the car starts drifting off the road, happens at the meeting level.
At the meeting level?
Yeah.
It happens through what Roark calls polite silence. We have to look at his bridges methodology, right? Baseline, reveal, integrate, document, govern, execute, stabilize.
Okay, sure.
I want to zero in on the reveal and document stages because this is where nearshore margins bleed to death.
So you were saying a lack of governance isn't the trigger.
I'm saying governance documents don't sit in on Zoom calls.
Fair point.
Let's walk through a real scenario. You have a Colombian QA lead or a senior developer on a call with a US-based product manager. The American client uses a vague English phrase, like they say, hey, we need to create a seamless user flow here. Just a quick update.
Right. Classic scope creep setup.
Exactly. Now, the Latin American professional knows perfectly well that seamless user flow is incredibly complex and touches the core database. But there's a cultural desire to be accommodating, a hesitation to challenge the client's authority, or maybe just a lack of confidence in navigating the conflict in a second language.
So they say, yes, we can do that.
Exactly. They say, yes, understood. That is polite silence. And in that 1 second, the scope of the project just doubled invisibly.
Wow.
Yeah. Roark has a very specific rule for this. He says, a meeting without documented conversion is only an expensive conversation. If the human being in the room does not have the professional discipline and linguistic confidence to challenge that vague English phrase, your rumble strips won't save you.
Because the developer already committed to the cliff?
Right. To reveal the hidden complexity and document the boundary is crucial. Without it, they're already off the edge.
But doesn't that polite silence only happen because the governance structure is missing? I mean, if you have an enterprise rule that explicitly says no scope changes without an explicit impact review ticket, the developer doesn't have to rely on their personal communication courage to push back.
Right. They point to the rules.
Exactly. They don't have to be the bad guy. They can say, hey, the system requires me to run an impact review. The structure pushes back for them.
A system cannot push back in real time if the person refuses to acknowledge that a scope change just happened.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, the Latin American professional has to recognize the risk hidden in the English phrasing and actively choose to surface it. Seamless is a trap word. You can have all the governance rubrics in the world, but if the developer smiles and accepts the fog, the governance fails, because the data entering the system is already compromised.
Which brings us to the actual mechanism of how AI should be deployed to solve this. Because if we are moving from identifying the problem to how we fix it, we have to look at Roark's role as an AI transformation strategist.
Right.
And his concept of rewiring, not wrapping. If you want to fix polite silence, you don't just put a chatbot over a broken communication process. You design multi-agent architectures.
Well, multi-agent architectures sound great in a boardroom, but what are they actually doing for the delivery team?
They are enforcing governed acceleration. Let's break down what a multi-agent architecture actually is. It is not just one AI tool. It's multiple AI systems talking to each other behind the scenes.
Okay.
Think of Roark's work with platforms like AIXT Symphony. The AI's role is to be a systemic orchestrator. It centralizes the workflow logic, the business rules, and the prompt designs.
So how does that apply to the Zoom call?
So, returning to your Zoom call example, when that QA lead finishes the meeting, the AI framework is already managing the orchestration of tasks. It is scanning the meeting transcript.
Wow.
Yeah. It is checking the proposed seamless flow against the original contract parameters in the data hub. And it's automatically flagging to a manager that a risk tier approval is needed before any code is committed.
So the AI acts as a safety net after the fact.
It is the structural backstop. It makes human error, like polite silence, less fatal because the AI is constantly enforcing the boundaries that the humans might be too polite to enforce. It takes the pressure off the individual.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Okay, go ahead.
You are treating AI entirely as an administrative auditor, but AI's most potent application for Latin American nearshore firms is not as an invisible background orchestrator catching mistakes after the meeting ends.
Then what is it?
It is a real-time cognitive pressure system to improve human judgment, in the moment. And this is the core of Roark's bilingual methodology. This is exactly why he introduces Dr. Maria AI.
Right, the AI persona from his field manuals. But isn't that just a training tool?
She is so much more than a training tool. Let's look at the actual text. In Building Bridges, The First 60 Days, Volume 1, a bilingual field manual for Latin American offshore professionals serving English-speaking clients, featuring Dr. Maria AI, La Voz de Presión Estratégica.
That's quite a title.
It is, but it's important. In it, Roark introduces this brilliant concept of English as the operating environment and Spanish as the comprehension and pressure layer.
Explain the mechanics of that. Why does the language split matter so much?
Because English is the arena, right? It is where requirements, risks, scope, and timelines are actively negotiated with the U.S. client. But negotiating in a second language requires immense cognitive load.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are translating the words, interpreting the cultural nuance, and doing the complex software engineering math in your head simultaneously. That is why Dr. Maria AI is positioned as La Voz de Presión Estratégica, the voice of strategic pressure. She operates in Spanish.
So the AI acts as an internal monologue?
Exactly. She grounds the Latin American professional in their native comprehension layer. When the client uses a vague word like seamless, the Dr. Maria AI framework challenges the professional in Spanish.
Like, what does she say?
She asks, "Are you accepting fog? Did you document that decision? Are you hiding risk out of politeness?" She doesn't audit the code. She elevates the immediate human judgment.
Right.
By the time we get to the follow-up book, Building Bridges, The First 60 Days, Volume 2, a bilingual field manual for Latin American offshore professionals serving English-speaking clients, featuring Dr. Maria, AI La Voz de Presión Estratégica, he is detailing how this bilingual AI pressure helps delivery teams master project recovery and scope control on their own. They don't need a multi-agent workflow to save them because they stop the bad scope from ever entering the system.
But if AI is just acting as a bilingual coach, applying cognitive pressure to individuals, you aren't transforming the enterprise. You are just tutoring it.
I wouldn't say just tutoring.
Well, if you are an investor or a founder of a nearshore firm, tutoring does not scale safely when you suddenly go from managing 3 SaaS implementations to handling 50 concurrent enterprise rollouts. You cannot build a durable nearshore business solely on the heroic communication efforts of a few bilingual leads who have great internal monologues.
It scales precisely because the human judgment improves at the micro level. I mean, the enterprise is fundamentally just a collection of individuals making micro decisions.
Sure.
If every developer, QA tester, and business analyst is making clearer, braver decisions in English because they have internalized that strategic pressure in Spanish, the whole enterprise becomes structurally sound from the bottom up.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently, because this brings us to the timeline of when this value was actually realized.
Right.
You are focusing heavily on the immediate interaction, like the kickoff call, the daily stand-up. But when does a nearshore firm actually secure its margins and build the kind of client trust that lasts for a 5-year contract?
Well,
I argue that durable value requires long-term transformation, the kind Roark spent decades building at Insala and Preparate AC.
and I will tell you exactly when that margin is won or lost. It is exclusively won or lost in the first 30 to 60 days. That is the entire premise of Roark's fractional client integration model.
Exclusively. That is a massive claim. You are saying years of execution don't matter?
I'm saying you never get 2 years of execution if you fail the transition.
Okay, I see.
The handoff from the sales cycle to actual delivery is the most dangerous phase of any software project. Sales promises are inherently directional, optimistic, and spoken in persuasive English. Delivery requires bounded binary conditions.
Right, the transition from sales to engineering.
Exactly. If a fractional client integration lead does not sit in those early meetings and immediately translate the optimistic sales fog into rigorous, documented delivery conditions, the project is doomed before a single line of code is written.
But surely the technical execution eventually takes over.
If you fail those first 60 days, you start bleeding margin immediately. You bleed it through rework, through unbilled scope creep, through constant firefighting because the client expected A and you are building B.
Yeah.
You don't even survive to see the benefits of your beautiful long-term multi-agent AI orchestration if your relationship crashes in month 1. All because nobody had the courage to say, let's document what quick means.
Look, I acknowledge the absolute criticality of the first 60 days. The honeymoon phase sets the tone, without question. But if you only focus on those first 60 days, you build a honeymoon, not a marriage. A marriage has to survive scale, employee turnover, and shifting market conditions. True organizational alignment requires establishing continuous feedback loops, monthly standards reviews, and enterprise-wide capability engines.
But those capability engines run on the data gathered in the first 60 days.
They run on systems. In his AI leadership roadmaps, Roark outlines the necessity of moving from isolated pilot projects to governed, enterprise-scale capability. You need a system that operates seamlessly in month 18, right?
Sure.
When the original fractional integration lead has moved on to another project, and 3 of your original developers have been promoted, if you don't have the AI architectures in place, if you haven't rewired the company to standardize data handling and risk tier approvals,
Then what happens?
then the trust you built in the first 60 days collapses under its own weight when the scale increases.
That is a very compelling argument. But have you considered that the systems you are talking about, the feedback loops, the risk tiers, are utterly dependent on the quality of the data fed into them?
Well, yes.
If the human bridge fails to capture the true client intent in English during the reveal stage, your long-term AI orchestration system is just highly efficiently processing garbage. The workflow will perfectly execute the wrong project.
It is absolutely true that garbage in leads to garbage out, but my argument is that the governance structure is what forces the quality of the data.
How so?
If the enterprise architecture physically prevents a task from advancing without a manager review playbook being completed, the human being is compelled to ask the right questions. The structure creates the behavior. You don't have to hope the developer feels brave today. The system requires them to be clear.
And my argument is that the behavior creates the structure. A Latin American offshore professional serving an English-speaking client operates in a high-stakes emotional environment.
True.
The client might be frustrated, or rushing, or aggressively vague. No workflow diagram, no matter how elegant, can navigate a tense, unscripted conversation about a missed deliverable.
Right.
That requires Dr. Maria, AI acting as that voice of strategic pressure, reminding them in Spanish to hold the line, to pause, to ask for an impact review, and to translate the emotion back into a bounded condition. That human resilience under pressure is what proves to the client that you are a partner, not just an order taker.
This really highlights why we are looking at this specific portfolio. Because if we step back and summarize, my position remains that the foundation of a successful nearshore delivery firm lies in treating AI adoption as a rigorous leadership test. Without explicit decision architecture, without data governance, and without the strategic AI transformation we see in frameworks like Ixta Symphony, organizations simply cannot scale safely. They can't protect their margins in a high-speed technological landscape if they rely solely on individual communication heroics. They need the engine.
And to summarize my perspective, the engine is useless without the steering wheel. Technical capability, no matter how advanced or orchestrated, is a commodity without the bridge of human communication.
Yeah.
The ultimate differentiator for Latin American offshore professionals is their ability to decode the English-speaking operating environment. They must be able to surface hidden risks, navigate polite silence, and build unshakable client trust during those high-stakes first 60 days. Without that human integration, the technology has no foundation to stand on.
What is truly remarkable here is how these two seemingly opposed views are perfectly reconciled in Roark's strategic model, aptly named the bridge between intent and delivery. It masterfully connects both of our perspectives.
It really does.
When you look at his background, it all makes sense. He took the rigorous systems discipline and the tactical intent decoding from his days as a Navy cryptologist, combined it with decades of scaling enterprise platforms at Insala, and unified it with his modern AI advisory work.
It really is a cohesive portfolio. It acknowledges a fundamental truth of this industry. You need the fractional client integration to secure the human trust and decode the intent in the first 60 days, and you need the AI transformation strategy to scale that trust over the next 5 years.
Right.
Technology only becomes truly powerful when people can trust it, understand it, and communicate its value clearly across cultures.
Whether our listeners today are founders trying to scale a nearshore firm, recruiters looking for the right bilingual talent profiles, or investors evaluating the operational maturity of a SaaS implementation company in Medellín or beyond, there's clearly so much more to explore in Roark's methodologies.
We certainly won't declare a winner today because the reality execution on the ground requires both. You need the structural compiler to scale, and you need the human navigator to survive the cross-cultural nuance.
We will leave you, the listener, to form your own conclusion on which piece of the puzzle your organization needs to build first. Because at the end of the day, stepping into the world of nearshore software delivery is stepping away from the clean logic of pure mathematics. It is stepping into operational muddy waters.
Mm-hmm.
And to cross those waters safely, you don't just need a faster machine. You need a bridge.